I remember the smell of gasoline, the stale scent of burnt coffee, the way the wind cut through my cardigan as I stood at the edge of that mountain rest stop, staring down the long highway that stretched into nowhere. It was early September. Labor Day weekend. Families were traveling, tourists snapping photos, the world bustling with motion. Except me, I was frozen. Alone, forgotten, or so I thought. 3 days earlier, I had boarded my son's SUV, excited for what was supposed to be a scenic road trip with my family, my son James, his wife Clara, and my two grandchildren, Lily and Noah. I had baked cookies the night before, packed their favorite snacks, even brought along gifts. Lily had been begging for a new sketchbook. Noah, a soccer ball. I imagined laughter, stories shared on winding roads, and quiet moments with my grandchildren under the stars. What I got was betrayal. That morning, I woke up early, eager. James pulled up in their new car, a shiny black vehicle far more luxurious than I expected from a family supposedly barely making mortgage. Clara waved politely from the passenger seat, distracted by her phone. The kids were in the back, headphones on, their young faces glowing from tablet screens. "Morning, Mom," James said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I climbed into the back, wedged between sports gear and a suitcase that wasn't mine. No one offered to help me with my bag. No one asked if I had remembered my medication. I told myself it was just modern busyness, that once we were on the road, things would feel warmer, closer. For the first few hours, it was pleasant. Lily showed me her digital drawings. Noah shared a video of his latest soccer goal. We stopped for lunch at a diner in a sleepy town, where Clara criticized the coffee and James took calls for work. After lunch, as we returned to the car, James paused. "Mom, the kids want to run around a bit. Why don't you grab a coffee from the station? We'll be back in 10. He didn't look me in the eye when he said it, but I nodded, oblivious. That was the last time I saw them. When I walked out with a paper cup in my hand, their car was gone. At first, I thought they were circling the lot or maybe stopping for gas, or... I waited 10 minutes, then 20, then 90, no calls. No messages. I texted James. Nothing. I called, voicemail. I stood outside holding that now lukewarm coffee, trying to reason with what I was seeing. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe they thought I was in the bathroom. Maybe. The thoughts spiraled. The sun moved. The shadows shifted, and I stood still. It wasn't until I stepped inside the small gas station and sat at a dusty table by the window that I accepted the truth. They weren't coming back. That moment, that realization, it didn't hit me like a slap. It sank in, slow and heavy like wet cement. I was 70 years old, a widow, a mother, a grandmother. And I had just been left behind by the very people I had once carried in my arms, wiped tears from, nursed through fevers, cheered on at graduations. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and above all, worthless. For several hours, I sat in silence. The gas station attendant, a young man in his 20s with kind eyes, checked on me once or twice. I gave him a weak smile. I didn't have words to explain what had just happened. That's when I picked up my phone and saw the Facebook post. An elderly woman left behind by her family at a rest stop. The comments were filled with outrage, people furious that a son or daughter could do such a thing to their parent. And I realized something chilling. This post was about this rest stop, this exact one. And that story, it was mine. Different name, different people, but the same crime, and here I was, the next chapter. But I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. I wasn't just some helpless old woman. I wasn't a burden to discard. I wasn't invisible. Because what James and Clara didn't know was that the house they lived in, the one with the new kitchen, the luxury furniture, the high-end appliances, was still legally mine. 6 months earlier, James had called in tears. "Mom, we're drowning," he had said. "Clara lost her job, the mortgage, the kids' school fees, everything's piling up. We might lose the house." He had sounded so broken, so much like the little boy who once ran to me with scraped knees and wide eyes. I couldn't say no. I had wired him $80,000 within the week, but I wasn't naive. My late husband was a businessman and I had learned from him, so I had my lawyer draw up a legal agreement. A loan, 2 years to repay. And until they did, I held the deed. At the time, James didn't protest. "You're a lifesaver, Mom," he had said. "We'll pay it back as soon as we can." But they never intended to. What I had seen that day, the BMW, the catered party, the furniture, they weren't signs of survival. They were signs of indulgence, funded by my sacrifice. hidden behind excuses. They had taken my money, my love, and now my dignity. But they didn't realize they had left behind something far more dangerous than a hurt old woman. They had left behind a mother who had just remembered who she was. I stood up from that gas station booth. My hands trembled not with fear but with resolve. I walked to the counter, thanked the young man, and asked if I could use the landline. My cell had no service. He nodded and handed it over. I called my sister Alina in Colorado and I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I'm coming to get you," she said. 3 hours later, Alina pulled up in her beat-up Subaru and jumped out with a fury I hadn't seen in decades. "They left you here?" she demanded. "They did." She looked at me, eyes blazing. "Then let's show them what happens when you mess with the wrong woman." That night, over wine and leftover pizza, we planned. I wasn't going to beg for love. I wasn't going to plead for attention. I was going to get back what was mine. And I was going to do it on my terms. This was no longer about hurt feelings. This was about justice. And this was only the beginning. Long before that rest stop, before the betrayal, before I became a name in someone's online outrage post, I was simply a mother. My name is Margaret Hayes. I was born in 1953 in a small town in Indiana. My life was never glamorous, but it was full of laughter, of long days and quiet evenings. Of simple joys, gardening, baking, listening to jazz on the radio. My husband, Robert, was the steady rock beneath it all. A man of few words but deep integrity. When he passed in 2015, something in me dimmed, but my purpose remained. My son, James, was our only child, the miracle after 2 miscarriages. I remember the first time I held him, red-faced and wriggling, with a cry that made me weep. I had never felt a love so fierce. As he grew, I poured everything into him. Robert worked long hours running a small auto repair shop, and I stayed home to raise James. Every school event, every scraped knee, every heartbreak, his pain was my pain. His joy mine too. He was a bright boy, sensitive, a bit dreamy. He loved books and drawing, hated sports, and would sit for hours making up stories about imaginary worlds. I encouraged it all. When he was 10 and said he wanted to be an architect, I bought him a sketch pad and a wooden model set. As he entered adulthood, I watched him chase that dream. He went to college, struggled with finances, but never gave up. When he met Clara, I was thrilled. She was charming, elegant, and seemed to adore him. They married in spring beneath a canopy of cherry blossoms. I cried through the whole ceremony, not from sadness but from pride. My boy had grown, he was building his own life. Then came Lily, then Noah. I became Grandma Maggie, and I loved every second of it. For years, I was their helper, their babysitter, their emergency contact, their financial safety net. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. That's what family does. So when James called me, voice cracking, saying they were on the verge of losing their home, I didn't hesitate. I remember that night clearly. It was raining, soft and steady. I had just finished reading a novel and was making chamomile tea when the phone rang. "Mom," his voice was tight. "James, what's wrong?" It's bad, Mom. Clara lost her job 3 months ago. We've been falling behind on mortgage payments. The bank sent us notices. We're trying everything, but we're scared." He paused. "I didn't want to call. I hate asking you for help, but I don't know what else to do." I was silent for a moment, not because I didn't want to help, but because I knew the weight of what he was asking. $80,000 is not a small sum. Even with the life insurance Robert had left, that was a huge portion of my remaining savings. Still, I didn't hesitate long. "Of course, James, I'll help." He cried, thanked me, told me I was saving their home, their sanity. "But I had conditions." "I want to help you, sweetheart," I said gently, "but we need to make it official. I'll have my lawyer draft an agreement. It's a loan. You can pay it back over time." There was a pause on the other end. Then a quiet, "Okay, Mom, whatever you think is best." I should have sensed it then, the hesitation, but love has a way of muting our instincts. Within a week, the documents were signed. The deed was temporarily transferred to my name with a clause that full ownership would return once the loan was repaid. I wasn't trying to control them. I just wanted protection. At 70, I couldn't afford blind trust. At first, everything seemed normal. They called often, sent pictures of the kids, told me how grateful they were. But as the months passed, the calls slowed. The updates became vague. When I asked about repayment, Clara said she was in between consulting gigs. James said the kids' school bills were piling up. They promised to make it right soon. Then the invitation stopped. That stung the most. I used to visit once a month, bring cookies, watch Lily paint, or help Noah with his math homework. But suddenly there were always reasons I couldn't come. Lily's sick. Noah has soccer camp. We're renovating the guest room. Every excuse chipped away at my faith. Still, I clung to hope, to the image of the son I had raised, the boy who used to draw castles and spaceships and give me handmade cards that said, "I love you to the moon and back." I told myself they were just stressed, busy, overwhelmed. But deep down, I knew something had changed. And then came the invitation, a road trip, just the five of us, a chance to reconnect. I said yes without thinking, because despite all the warning signs, despite the distance, despite the silence, I was still his mother. I still loved him, I still believed in him, and that was my blind spot. They say love is patient, love is kind, but love without boundaries can also be exploited. I see that now. Because what I thought was a rekindling of our bond was, in truth, the prelude to abandonment. They had planned it. Everything, the call, the trip, the rest stop, was calculated, not just to get rid of me, but to keep the house, the money, their image, and perhaps worst of all, to rewrite the story so that I was the one who left them. But what they didn't know, what they could never understand, is that a mother's heart doesn't just break. It remembers, it recalibrates. And when it heals, it does not return the same. That night, as I lay in Alina's guest room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead, I made a vow. I would not beg, I would not plead, I would uncover every lie. I would retrieve every penny, not for revenge, but for truth, for dignity, for the girl inside me, the young Margaret who once dreamed of having a family that would never make her feel unwanted. And for every parent out there who gave too much, hoping to be loved in return. This was no longer about a deed or a dollar. This was about reclaiming my worth, and I was just getting started. When someone betrays you, the shock is immediate, but the understanding comes in waves. In the days following my abandonment, I found myself replaying everything. Every phone call, every message, every subtle shift in tone or body language. Hindsight is cruel like that, it sharpens details you once ignored. Alina, my sister, was both a comfort and a storm. She made me tea every morning, asked if I wanted to talk, and cursed James under her breath as she read the morning paper. She reminded me of who I used to be before motherhood had softened my edges into something malleable. "Don't you dare let this break you," she'd say. "You were Margaret Hayes long before you were James's mother." It took me a few days to believe that. I didn't cry much, I didn't sleep much either, but I started digging. The first thing I did was pull out the legal documents, those papers I had James sign when I gave him the money. They were still in my home office, safely stored in a file cabinet labeled important. My lawyer, Mr. DeWitt, had always been meticulous, and thank God for that. The deed was still in my name. That one fact gave me air to breathe. They hadn't transferred it back yet because they hadn't repaid the loan, which meant I had legal standing whether they liked it or not. Still, I wanted to be sure. I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning, dressed in my best blazer, hair pinned tight, not a trace of emotion on my face. I requested the most recent records on the property. The clerk, a young woman named Shelby, printed them for me. There it was in black and white, Margaret Hayes, owner of record. But something else caught my eye. A notice of lien for interior remodeling work, over $20,000, filed just 3 weeks ago. I blinked at the date. Remodeling, James had said they were broke, that Clara was jobless, that they could barely feed the kids. So how could they afford new countertops? I thanked Shelby and left, the papers clutched tightly in my purse. Back at Alina's, I began what I jokingly called Operation Truth. I made a list. Bank statements, social media, property photos, any breadcrumbs I could find. It didn't take long. On Clara's Facebook, I found a photo posted 2 weeks earlier. A marble kitchen island, pristine and glowing, captioned "Finally done, worth every penny." Every penny of mine, I thought. On James's Instagram, a picture of him and Noah at a luxury resort. "Weekend reset," the caption said. The timestamp was from the same weekend he claimed they were scraping together enough to cover utilities. I felt the slow burn of betrayal deepen. They hadn't just taken my money, they had used me, lied to me, then cast me aside like old furniture. And now they were building a life on my sacrifice and painting me as the problem. Because then I found the worst of it. A post from Clara in a parenting group made 2 days after they abandoned me. It read, "We've had to make hard decisions to protect our peace. Toxic family dynamics can poison even the happiest home. Sometimes letting go is love." Letting go, is that what they called it? Abandoning your 70-year-old mother at a gas station was letting go? I sat in silence, staring at the screen. The comments praised her bravery, called her an inspiration. Not one of them knew the truth, but I did. I had the receipts. Still, rage alone wouldn't fix this. I needed a plan. The first step, confrontation, not the kind that ended in shouting matches. That would give them control. I wanted them off balance. I wanted them aware that I was watching and that I hadn't disappeared. So I did something unexpected. I asked to visit. I called James on a new number. My old one was likely blocked. He answered, sounding confused. "Mom." "Hi, James," I said, voice calm. "I'd like to come by this weekend. I miss the kids." There was a long pause, then a slow, cautious, "Of course, Clara's been asking about you." Liar. Saturday morning, I arrived in a rented car, dressed not like a grieving mother but like a woman with purpose. Navy pantsuit, low heels, a folder in my bag filled with everything I'd uncovered. The house was more extravagant than I remembered. A manicured lawn, a new fence. Even the welcome mat looked expensive. Clara opened the door with a smile that barely twitched her lips. "Margaret, this is a surprise." "I called," I said. "James said I could come." She stepped aside and I entered. The living room looked like something out of a magazine, not a trace of financial distress. A glass coffee table, designer throw pillows, fresh flowers. "How are the kids?" I asked. "They're upstairs doing schoolwork." "On a Saturday." She hesitated. "They're on a new schedule." I smiled thinly, "Of course." James came down a moment later. He looked thinner. Not from stress, but like someone who discovered boutique gyms and smoothies. "Mom," he said, "you look well." "I feel well," I replied, "especially now that I've been reviewing the documents. The ones you signed when I loaned you $80,000. His smile faltered. I didn't press it. "Not yet." We sat. They offered tea. I declined. "I've been thinking," I began, "about the agreement, about the deed. About the remodeling work and the resort trips and the kitchen photos online." Clara's hand tightened on her cup. James cleared his throat. "Mom, we never meant." I held up a hand. "No explanations. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell you that I'm aware of everything and that you have two choices." They both sat still. "You can begin repayments, monthly on time with interest, or..." I opened my folder and slid a copy of the deed across the table. "I'll exercise my legal right to sell." Clara's face went pale. James opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "You'd really do that?" I looked at them, at the son I had raised, the woman he had chosen. "I didn't leave you at a rest stop, James. You did that to me." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. "I'll give you 2 weeks," I said, standing. "Make your decision." And then I walked out, my heels clicking against the polished floor, each step a reclamation of the woman they thought they had buried under their convenience. As I drove away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was restoration, of truth, of dignity, of the parts of me they had tried to erase. This wasn't over, but it had begun. The silence after my visit to their house didn't last long. Exactly 3 days later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name typed in capital letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a formal letter from a lawyer representing James and Clara, requesting that I voluntarily relinquish any legal claim to the property to avoid further familial distress and potential emotional harm. I laughed. Actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity had finally hit its peak. They had abandoned me, lied to me, and spent my money. Now they wanted me to let it go, for their peace. Eleanor wasn't so calm. "They're pushing you, Margaret. They're hoping you'll give in." I nodded. "They don't think I'll fight back." She folded her arms across her chest. "Then it's time to show them they don't know you anymore." I called Mr. DeWitt, my lawyer, and set up a meeting the next morning. He was older now, slower in movement, but his mind was still sharp. "They're bluffing," he said after reading the letter. "They know they're cornered. Legally, the house is yours until the loan is repaid. They have no grounds." "I want to proceed," I said simply. He studied me for a long moment. Are you sure once we start this there's no turning back, it'll get ugly? It's already ugly, I said. They just made it official. We began the process immediately, drafting a formal demand for repayment with a 30-day deadline. If they failed, we would initiate foreclosure. I expected more silence. Instead, they escalated. First came the calls from unknown numbers at all hours, then came the online posts. Clara began painting me as unstable. She posted vague updates about toxic elders and being forced to protect her children from harm. It was slander but effective. Friends of theirs started commenting, siding with her. Even distant relatives sent me messages, confused and concerned. The worst part, James said nothing, not one word, not one call. The boy who once cried in my arms after scraping his knee now couldn't pick up a phone to explain himself. It hurt, more than I let on, but the pain didn't stop me, it fueled me. I began documenting everything, every message. Every call, every post. Mr. DeWitt advised we prepare for countersuits. Accusations, delay tactics. They'll try to question your mental capacity, he warned. It's a common tactic. I nodded, let them. And they did. A week later, I was served a notice. James and Clara had filed a petition to assess my cognitive function, alleging that I was mentally unfit to manage complex financial decisions and therefore should not be allowed to control the deed. It was brilliant in a cruel way. If successful, I could be declared incompetent and lose everything. Eleanor was furious. They're trying to break you. But I was ready. I underwent a full psychological evaluation with a licensed professional. Tests, interviews, written assessments. I answered every question with clarity, every memory with precision. I had nothing to hide. When the results came back, the report was definitive. Patient demonstrates full mental competency, with exceptional recall, reasoning, and awareness. I framed it, literally, hung it in my hallway across from the front door. A quiet reminder that truth, when rooted in resolve, cannot be shaken. But while I prepared legal responses, I couldn't stop thinking about my grandchildren. Lily and Noah, they had no idea what was happening. No idea their parents were at war with their grandmother. I wondered if they asked about me, if they missed me, if they believed the stories Clara was telling. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message from Lily. It was a voice note. Hi, Grandma, I miss you. Mom says you're not feeling well, but I think about you every night. I kept your cookies in the freezer. Noah says hi too. I love you. I sat on my porch and cried for the first time in weeks. Not from defeat, but from the reminder of why I had to keep going. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, about integrity, about standing tall even when the people you love try to tear you down. The next phase came fast. James and Clara refused to respond to the repayment demand. 30 days passed. No contact. We filed the foreclosure notice. Within a week, they countered, alleging emotional distress, elder abuse, and that I had manipulated them into an unfair contract. It was nonsense, and it opened the door for discovery. Mr. DeWitt began gathering records, bank statements, social media posts, photos of their renovations. We subpoenaed Clara's employment history and found that she had, in fact, been working remotely for a financial firm for the past 5 months while claiming unemployment. We obtained transaction records showing extravagant purchases, jewelry, luxury clothing, spa treatments. None of it aligned with the image of a struggling family they had painted. We even found travel records, a trip to Mexico. First class, and then came the final straw, security footage from the gas station. It showed everything: the car pulling away, me walking out with coffee, my expression shifting from confusion to horror. Mr. DeWitt watched it silently. Then turned to me. This changes everything. We filed charges: elder abandonment, financial fraud, and emotional abuse. I didn't want revenge, but I wanted accountability, and I was finally close. My case was no longer about a house. It was a reckoning, one I never asked for, but one I was ready to finish. There's something eerie about the days before battle. The world moves normally, mail arrives, birds sing, neighbors mow their lawns, but inside, a storm is building. It hums behind every breath, a quiet tension coiling beneath the ribs. That was my reality as we prepared for court. On the outside, I lived as usual. I drank my tea, tended to the garden, fed the cat that had started appearing on my porch like clockwork. But behind those daily motions, I was memorizing facts, timelines, legal terms. I was transforming from mother to witness, from nurturer to warrior. Mr. DeWitt had warned me, "This will not be quick, Margaret. They'll try every trick in the book. Delay, distract, discredit. Are you sure you're ready?" I didn't even blink. They wanted war. Let's give them one. We filed a formal lawsuit and with it, a detailed evidentiary package. It included the original loan agreement notarized and signed, proof of the deed transfer, transaction records showing my $80,000 wire, social media posts displaying their luxury lifestyle, the security footage from the gas station, the psychological evaluation proving my competency, Clara's employment records contradicting her unemployment claim. When James and Clara were served, their response was swift and panicked. First, they tried to delay proceedings, claiming health issues. Then, they submitted a counterclaim alleging emotional duress and manipulation by a mentally unstable elder. That claim didn't last long. The judge reviewed the psychological assessment and dismissed their concerns within minutes. But it revealed something telling. They were not planning to defend themselves with facts. They were planning to attack me with lies. Eleanor, ever the protector, insisted on attending every meeting, every hearing. She called it her personal mission to stand guard. "You raised that boy," she'd mutter. "The least I can do is help you unraise him." We laughed, bitterly sometimes, but laughter was still ours. In the weeks that followed, the case picked up steam. Our legal team uncovered more. A private investigator confirmed what we suspected. James and Clara had used my loan to not only renovate their home, but also to pay off old debts unrelated to the mortgage, including Clara's personal credit cards and a lease on her luxury vehicle. Worse, we found that they had taken out a second mortgage without notifying me, violating the terms of our agreement. This was no longer mismanagement. It was deliberate deception. We compiled everything. Then came the subpoenas. We called witnesses, neighbors, contractors, even Clara's employer. One neighbor testified that he'd overheard Clara laughing about her retirement plan being Old Lady Hayes. Another recalled how James bragged that the house was safe now that Mom gave in. The betrayal deepened with every file, every testimony. But the worst was yet to come. CPS, Child Protective Services. I received a call one Tuesday morning from a woman named Sandra. She was polite but firm. "Mrs. Hayes, I need to speak with you about a report filed by your son and daughter-in-law." My heart dropped. She explained that they had accused me of erratic behavior, suggesting that I might be unfit to be around the children. I felt dizzy. Is this an attempt to sever my relationship with Lily and Noah? Sandra hesitated. "We take all reports seriously, but off the record, it's not uncommon for this kind of thing to arise during legal disputes." We scheduled a home visit. I cleaned every inch of my house, laid out Lily's drawings from my fridge, framed the photo of Noah holding my hand at the science fair. Sandra came, she asked questions, she looked around, she spoke with Eleanor, who didn't sugarcoat anything. When she left, she smiled gently. "I think we're done here." A week later, the report cleared me entirely, but the damage lingered. James had tried to erase me not just from the property, but from his children's lives. That night, I stood in front of my fireplace and stared at a family photo from years ago, Lily on my shoulders, Noah laughing, James grinning. I took it down, not out of spite, out of clarity. This wasn't my family anymore. Family doesn't lie, family doesn't steal, and family doesn't weaponize love. We moved forward with the court timeline. Clara, in a last-ditch effort, offered a private settlement, $20,000 in exchange for dropping the suit and leaving them alone. I didn't respond with words. I had Mr. DeWitt draft a single-sentence reply. "We will accept full repayment with interest, or we will see you in court." They declined. The trial was set. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver, because I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for the millions of elders who are told to sit down, shut up, and fade quietly into guilt-laced silence. I had a voice, and I would use it, loudly, clearly, without apology. The courtroom was cold. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones not because of air conditioning, but because of what hangs in the air: tension, history, betrayal. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Mr. DeWitt, folder in hand, spine straight, heart steady. Across from me sat James and Clara, their lawyer whispering something neither of them looked interested in. Clara was dressed in muted beige, her expression fixed in something between disdain and fear. James wouldn't meet my eyes. The bailiff called the room to order and the judge entered, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a face that didn't tolerate games. This case, she began, is not just about money, it's about trust. I felt that sentence land deep in my chest. The opening arguments were brief, our case was clear. A legally binding loan of $80,000 secured by property, defaulted terms, intentional fraud, emotional abuse, abandonment. Their argument was chaos disguised as sympathy. Clara's lawyer painted me as a confused elder, manipulated into signing documents she didn't understand. He described James as a loving son caught between duty and survival, and Clara as a mother trying to protect her family from toxic interference. It was well-performed fiction, but fiction nonetheless. Then came the testimonies. Mr. DeWitt called me first. I stood, walked to the witness box, took the oath, and sat, my voice calm, my hands folded. He asked me to recount everything, and I did. From the phone call begging for help to the signed contract to the abandonment at the rest stop. Every detail, every receipt, every truth. At one point, Clara scoffed aloud. The judge gave her a warning glare that silenced the room. Mr. DeWitt then displayed the deed transfer on the overhead monitor, followed by bank records showing the loan, photos of the renovations, the resort vacations, Clara's work contract from the financial firm. Even the time-stamped post showing her flaunting the new kitchen 2 weeks after claiming unemployment. I watched the jury's faces. Some leaned forward, others frowned. A few shook their heads slightly. Then came the security footage. There I was, walking out with coffee, stopping, looking around, the moment dawning. It was silent in the courtroom as it played. When it ended, the judge looked at James. Her expression didn't change, but her silence spoke volumes. Then came the defense. They called James. He looked older, not wiser, just worn, like someone who had been sprinting through lies for too long. His lawyer led him gently through a narrative of stress, fear, financial collapse. I never meant to hurt my mother, James said, voice shaking. We were drowning, I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to believe him, I almost did, until the cross-examination. Mr. DeWitt was calm, methodical. Mr. Hayes, he began, did you or did you not accept $80,000 from your mother in January of this year? Yes. Did you sign the loan agreement before a licensed notary? Yes. Were you aware that the agreement included a clause allowing your mother to retain the deed until repayment? Yes. Did you repay any of the loan? A pause. No. Did you abandon your mother at a gas station? James shifted. It wasn't abandonment. We needed space. She was interfering. Interfering, Mr. DeWitt repeated. Would you say that justifies driving away from a 70-year-old woman without telling her, without arranging transportation, without checking if she was safe? No answer. The silence said everything. Clara was next. Her testimony was colder. She stuck to the script, claimed emotional abuse, claimed I weaponized generosity, that I hovered, shamed, and manipulated. Then Mr. DeWitt presented her employment records, her social media, her luxury purchases. Can you explain the spa package you purchased 3 days after receiving the loan? He asked. She hesitated. It was a gift from a friend. And the trip to Cancun. A family reward. We needed a break. On your mother-in-law's money. Objection sustained, but the jury had heard it. The final witness was Sandra from CPS. She testified that the complaint filed against me was baseless and that her visit confirmed a healthy, stable environment. There was no indication of cognitive decline or danger to the children, she said. Quite the opposite. Her words were nails in the coffin of their defense. Closing arguments came swiftly. Mr. DeWitt stood. This is not about bad luck, he said. This is about bad choices. Mrs. Hayes gave from love, they responded with deceit. And now when called to account, they cry manipulation, but you cannot twist a contract. You cannot twist truth. Their lawyer mumbled something about family being complicated, about generational conflict. But it rang hollow. The judge recessed for deliberation. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. When they returned, their foreperson stood. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Margaret Hayes, on all counts. I exhaled, not in triumph but in relief. The verdict ordered full repayment of the loan plus accrued interest. Immediate transfer of the property back to my name. Legal costs covered by James and Clara. An official finding of intentional elder abuse and abandonment to be entered into public record. The judge didn't look at me as she issued the ruling. She looked at James. You had a mother who gave you everything, she said quietly. And you tried to erase her. The law remembers what you hope to forget. I gathered my papers, my dignity, and walked out of the courtroom, not with a strut, but with steady steps. Outside, the sun was warm, the sky wide. Eleanor hugged me. It's done. Almost, I said, now we rebuild. Court may have ended with a gavel strike and a ruling read aloud, but healing does not arrive so cleanly. It took weeks, months, even for the dust to settle after the verdict. The press caught wind of the case. Local news stations called it a grandmother's fight for justice. A few outlets requested interviews, but I declined. This wasn't about fame. This was about reclaiming my voice in a world that often asks women my age to lower theirs. James and Clara didn't appeal. They couldn't afford to. The financial judgment was heavy. Not just repayment, but penalties, interest, and court costs. They had no choice but to sell the house to cover it. I considered letting it go quietly, transferring it to a new owner, but in the end, I reclaimed it. Not out of spite. But because it was mine, I didn't move in. I renovated. And I sold it, this time on my own terms. The profit allowed me to recover the lost funds and more. I invested part of it, and the rest I used for something unexpected. A scholarship fund. I named it after my late husband, Robert, and my first grandchild, Lily, the Robert and Lily Fund for Children of Broken Homes. Because despite what they'd done, I still believed in the children, and they were blameless. The first time I saw Lily and Noah again, it was supervised. CPS arranged the meeting. Clara wasn't happy, but she had no say. The courts granted me visitation rights with ongoing review. James didn't even show up. Lily ran to me. Noah stood still, his eyes wide. I missed you, Lily whispered. I pulled her into my arms. I missed you more. Noah approached slowly, then handed me something, a drawing. It showed a house, and in front of it a woman holding two kids' hands. You still have us, he said. I cried, not because I was sad, but because they remembered. Because somewhere in all the lies, the truth had survived in their hearts. Later that week, I received a letter from a woman named Janet in Arizona. She said she had read about the case online and recognized her own story in mine. She had loaned money to her daughter and been manipulated, then shunned. She felt powerless. She wrote, "Your story reminded me that we are not alone, that standing up for yourself at 70 is not an act of rebellion, it's an act of survival." More letters followed, emails, messages, dozens, then hundreds. And suddenly I was no longer a retired widow from Indiana. I was a voice, so I leaned into it. I partnered with a legal advocacy group that specialized in elder rights. They invited me to speak at local events, to sit on panels, to help shape policies that protected vulnerable seniors. At first, I was nervous. I had never spoken to crowds. But the first time I stepped up to a microphone and said, "My name is Margaret Hayes," and I was left behind, something in me shifted. The room went silent. And then slowly heads nodded, tears welled, applause followed. I told my story again and again, not to relive the pain, but to light the way for others still in it. Clara and James moved out of state. I heard they were living in a rental, trying to rebuild their credit. I felt no joy in their downfall, but I also felt no guilt. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. The relationship with my grandchildren took time. Trust, once cracked, does not mend overnight, but slowly we rebuilt. Weekends at the park, video calls, shared recipes. Lily started drawing again. Noah joined a robotics club. One day Lily asked, "Grandma, do you hate Mom and Dad?" I paused. "No," I said honestly, "but I don't trust them." "And that's different." She nodded slowly, understanding more than a child should have to. As autumn came, I planted a new garden at Eleanor's place where I now lived part-time. Lavender, rosemary, basil, things that took time, care, patience. Like healing, like justice, like love when it is rebuilt on stronger foundations. I wrote letters to myself sometimes. To the woman I was the day James drove away. To remind her that she didn't disappear, that she wasn't erased. That the silence they left her in became the space she filled with her own strength. One letter simply said, "They thought you were quiet because you were weak, but you were quiet because you were watching, listening, choosing when to rise. And when you did, you didn't scream, you spoke, and the world listened." I didn't win because I was clever, I won because I remembered my worth, and I would never forget it again. Legacy is not a house, not a last name, not a photo album on the shelf or a deed tucked in a drawer. Legacy is what you leave in people's hearts long after you're gone. I used to believe my legacy would be my family. That the years I poured into them, the meals, the advice, the sleepless nights would shape them, guide them, protect them. I was wrong. Family, I learned, is not who you raise. It's who rises for you when everything falls apart. After the trial, after the dust of litigation and the paperwork and the long courtroom speeches had faded, I found myself in a quiet I had never known before. But unlike the silence I had once feared, the one that haunted me at the rest stop, this silence was peaceful. Earned, powerful. The garden bloomed fuller that spring. Eleanor and I spent mornings with coffee on the porch, talking less and listening more. Some days I sat alone with a notebook and let the words pour out, not for court. Not for anyone else, just for me. It was in that stillness I began to understand something deeper. I had thought justice was the destination, but really it was just the door. What lay beyond was the life I would build from that hard-earned freedom. One afternoon, I visited the community center where I now volunteered once a week. I taught a class called Protecting What's Yours, a workshop for seniors on financial literacy, legal safeguards, and recognizing manipulation. We kept it light but real. One of the attendees, a widower named Harold, pulled me aside after class. "My daughter's been asking for access to my savings," he whispered. "It's who rises for you when everything falls apart." After the trial, after the dust of litigation and the paperwork and the long courtroom speeches had faded, I found myself in a quiet I had never known before. But unlike the silence I had once feared, the one that haunted me at the rest stop, this silence was peaceful, earned, powerful. The garden bloomed fuller that spring. Eleanor and I spent mornings with coffee on the porch, talking less and listening more. Some days I sat alone with a notebook and let the words pour out. Not for court, not for anyone else, just for me. It was in that stillness I began to understand something deeper. I had thought justice was the destination. But really, it was just the door. What lay beyond was the life I would build from that hard-earned freedom. One afternoon, I visited the community center where I now volunteered once a week. I taught a class called Protecting What's Yours, a workshop for seniors on financial literacy, legal safeguards, and recognizing manipulation. We kept it light but real. One of the attendees, a widower named Harold, pulled me aside after class. "My daughter's been asking for access to my savings," he whispered. "Says it's just temporary, but I don't know, you think I'm being paranoid." I looked him in the eye. "Paranoia is fear without reason. Caution is wisdom learned, you're being wise." He smiled, the relief in his shoulders unmistakable. That's what my legacy had become, not just surviving what was done to me, but passing forward the strength to stop it from happening again. The scholarship fund, too, began making ripples. The first recipient was a girl named Sophia. Her essay spoke of escaping emotional neglect, of finding healing through art. I met her at the award ceremony. She wore second-hand shoes, but her spirit outshone everyone in the room. "Thank you," she said, gripping my hand. I thought I was invisible. I squeezed back, "You're not, and you never will be again." The foundation expanded. I named the next program The Quiet Rebellion, a mentorship circle for women over 50 starting over. Divorcees, widows, survivors of silence. We met once a month, shared tea and stories. Some cried, some laughed, all healed. At home, Lily and Noah became my constants again. Their visits grew longer, our conversations deeper. We didn't pretend everything was perfect, but we didn't have to. The truth was enough. One day, Lily sat beside me, legs crossed like mine. "Grandma," she asked, "do you ever miss how things were?" I thought for a long time. "I miss who I thought they were," I said. "But I don't miss living small to make them comfortable." She nodded slowly. "I think I want to be like you." I smiled. "Be better." In my final letter to myself, the last in that stack of pages I had written since the rest stop, I wrote these words. "You are not what was done to you. You are not who walked away from you. You are what you choose to rebuild. You are the silence that learned to sing." Margaret Hayes, mother, widow, survivor, became more than a name in a court docket. She became a symbol, not of pain, but of power, not of victimhood, but of victory, not of what was taken, but of what was reclaimed. The rest stop is still there. I drove by it once. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. Because the woman who stood there, coffee in hand, tears on her cheeks, was no longer waiting. She was walking, forward, always forward.